Hi, my name is Viola, and I've been interviewing my dad about his 1997 Everest summit climb. He went with a Nova expedition, and they actually filmed a documentary while he was there, and he was with famous climbers like Ed Viesturs, Guy Cotter, David Brashears, and a few other notable climbers. I'm a naturally curious person, and even though it's 30 years later, I had a lot of questions about my dad's Everest climb, and I wanted to ask him those questions and share them with you all, because I think it's really interesting, and a lot of people want answers to those hot topic Everest questions. So I created this series, My Dad Climbed Everest and I Have Questions. I originally made it for TikTok, so that's why it's formatted the way it is. I encourage you to check out my TikTok if you want to see it there in kind of its original form. But otherwise, these are compilations of those videos. In today's video, we're talking about the following subjects. So first, we're going to talk about how much weight he lost while climbing Mount Everest. He went twice, so he tells us how much weight for each time. It's a doozy, so stay tuned for that. And then I asked him why he'd want to put his body through that and why other people want to put their body through that. Then he tells us about the long-lasting health effects he's had from climbing Everest. Again, he climbed it 30 years later, so he's kind of been able to see what climbing has done to his body long term. And he tells us about how he believes climbing Mount Everest actually gave him asthma. Then he tells us about his experience with hypoxia in the death zone of Mount Everest. Then his experience with periodic breathing while on the mountain and what high altitude does to your body, along with what high altitude does to him now and how he's seen his reaction to altitude change over the years. So that's all we're going to cover, and I hope you enjoy.
I lost quite a bit of weight on Everest. Never been a big eater. I'm not even a big eater back home here at sea level. And in 1991, when I was on Everest, I lost 22 pounds. I had multiple bouts of giardia, and I was not very impressed with the food. It was a bunch of rice and lentils and boiled potatoes and things like that. I really struggled. A bunch of eggs, cheese, and I struggled to keep weight on because the food was pretty bland. And when you're at altitude, you have no appetite, you're nauseated a lot. And so that 22 pounds melted off me. And a lot of it was muscle mass. And then in 97, I think I only lost about 10 pounds, 10 to 12 pounds, not a lot. We had pretty decent food. We tried to eat, good food at base camp, like chicken and eggs. We had some canned fruit, things like that. We even had yogurt at base camp that we made every day, and good coffee, which was very important. So I didn't lose that much weight. But in 97, I also forced myself to eat as much as I possibly can. And that's one of the things I learned about in 91 was just how many calories you burn a day. And it's almost impossible not to lose weight on these big expeditions. But in 97, I really made myself eat. Even when I was not hungry, I would force that food down and make sure I ate a couple big meals a day up there, which I think really made a big difference in my strength and able to maintain some form of muscle mass, and also have the energy when I needed it. So why would I want to put my body through all that? I was pretty driven. Try Everest one more time, but I also enjoyed climbing. And I really enjoyed pushing myself to the limit in the mountains. Yeah, it's a little addictive. It was my life, and I loved the mountains. I love climbing with people that have the same goal, and people that are physically fit and know what they're doing. It's a great lifestyle, and I recommend it for anybody. And yes, I did think about back then if there's any long-term physical or mental ramifications for going above 8,000 meters. But I weighed the risk and I thought it was worth it. And here I am today. So when I got back from Everest, after a couple months of kind of getting my body weight back and stuff, I started working out again. And I noticed I thought I was out of shape. I was having breathing problems, and I ended up going to a pulmonologist, and the doctor said I had asthma. I had never had asthma until I got back from Everest in '97. I probably did some damage to my lungs on the mountain. And to this day, since the '97 expedition, I've noticed I get upper respiratory infections a lot easier, and I get colds. I've had COVID a few times, and when I was there last year in 2023, I got COVID around 17,000 feet. I got pneumonia, and I got pulmonary edema. So my lungs were pretty fried, and I had to go to the hospital in Kathmandu for a night. And then when I came back to Indiana, I had to go to the hospital when I got back to work on my lungs. Hypoxia past Camp 4. Um, Great question. I had so much hypoxia, I don't remember. My blood oxygen sat level, we were acclimated and I was on oxygen, probably in the lower 70s most of the time when I was up there, maybe lower 80s. It's hard, I can't remember. But we did monitor that, and if you watch Everest, the Death Zone, the Nova's documentary on the climb, you'll see how our cognitive function declined the higher we went in elevation, especially at Camp 4 when we were taking those cognitive function tests. I recommend you watch that, and you'll see our decline, our slow decline in memorization and basically cognitive function in general. It was pretty scary. And I'm wondering if I did any long-term damage. You never know. Who knows? Did I hallucinate up there on the mountain? I think when I was when Ed was giving me the Heimlich maneuver at Camp 3 on the way down from the summit, I wouldn't call it hallucinations, but I would say something was happening. I was probably hypoxic. I was under a lot of stress. I was physically drained, and I was thinking of things, past things in my life that had happened, and I was also wondering if I died, if I was going to go to warmer climates. So I was kind of hallucinating, I guess, a little bit, or just misfiring mentally. I was also extremely relaxed, to be upfront with you, at a point after I kind of realized that, hey, I don't have this. I could go either way. I could die or I could live through this. All the screw ups in my life were playing in front of me in a black and white movie at Camp 3 when I was sitting there trying to breathe and stay alive and wondering, kind of analyzing my life in general. And I just wasn't really sure. I understand what you're asking on the periodic breathing episodes is what we call them in the mountains. That's covered in our Nova documentary, Everest, the Death Zone. They talk about that. It's called hypoxic response rate. When you go to sleep at night, your breathing rate slows down, and when that happens, is your body kind of starts gasping for air, trying to get more air at altitude. In the last 2 years, I've gone to Nepal, usually around 15,000 feet or so. Have started getting periodic breathing episodes where I go to sleep at night, my breathing rate decreases, and I kind of wake up gasping for air. So you really don't sleep. And it's also called chain stokes. And that's a fairly common deal in the mountains, especially above 14,000 feet. So I've started taking Diamox when I go to Nepal on treks and other trips, and that seems to help. It's a normal phenomena, and it's also kind of irritating too, because it really cuts into the sleep, which is a bummer. Never had it on Everest, and I had no periodic breathing episodes until just the last couple of years. Basically, when I turned 60 or 59, is when I started having these issues, and they're very irritating, and it really affects your sleep. It's almost impossible to sleep when you have a real bad case of it. I think Diamox helps, acclimation helps, staying hydrated helps. So the question is, did I lose brain cells while climbing? I probably did. I was hypoxic for a number of days, low blood oxygen levels. I'm not a super athlete like Ed Viesters or David Brashears or Pete Athens or Guy Cotter. And so I probably lost a lot more brain cells combined than those guys did. But I think I turned out okay. I don't really feel anything, but you never know long term. Being at altitude is not the healthiest thing you can do to your body. Um, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. But when you're up at altitude, you're not getting the oxygen to your brain, you're not getting it to your stomach, so you can't digest food properly, so you're slowly dying up there. And your brain is probably losing a lot of brain cells because you're hypoxic. And I've said in the past, it's like that old drug commercial that this is your brain on drugs, and the lady puts an egg with or a frying pan out with a couple eggs in it, and it's frying. And it's probably very similar because you're destroying brain cells and you're just not functioning normally up there. And I'm not. Speaking for myself, guys like Ed Viesturs can, because he's a superhuman being. I was at the limit of human endurance and of my my training and my cognitive function, able to make decisions. So it's definitely your brain is fried up there. I've noticed in the last few years that my body has changed, especially at night. I get periodic breathing episodes, usually around 15,000 feet and up. And I never had that. And I never had any altitude issues at all until just a few years ago. And I think it's just because I'm basically almost 62 years old. Things aren't working as well as they used to. And I also think there was some sort of a cumulative effect of being at, climbing and my lungs and everything. I'm getting older, so my body's changing, and I'm not able to acclimate as well and adjust to high altitude. So I've made a promise I'm not going to go above 16,000 feet for a while, ever.